Morning guys, so this is going to be a short discussion on symbolic interactionism. So this is part of the A-level Sociology course, theory and methods topic, and specifically looking at symbolic interactionism and the social action approaches. So to start off with symbolic interactionism, we kind of need to look at what it is. And it's about focusing on our ability to understand the world, to make impressions of the world, shape the world through our interactions, our understanding and symbols that we see. So individuals place meanings and attach definitions to situations, to actions, to events, to locations, and that's how we make sense of our world. Our world is shaped by these meanings and definitions that we attach to society around us. So if you imagine these two symbols here, so if you're learning to drive, if you can drive, you'll look at these symbols and you will know what they mean, or I hope you know what they mean. Now the idea being is that these two symbols, when you look at them, they don't explicitly say what they are asking you to do. They do not say or tell you what is happening, but you look at the symbol, you know what it means, and you know as a result the action that you have to take. So that, for example, on the left you cannot overtake, and the symbol on the right meaning that two lanes are going to merge into one. So you know what these mean and you change your behavior, or you act according to the symbols. So emojis are a really good example of symbolic interactionism, and I think they're really good examples of these symbols that contain a deeper meaning, they contain a message, they contain an ulterior to what they show you and what you see. And a good example of this, I think, is the aubergine emoji. You wouldn't send, or I'd hope you wouldn't send that one to your mum, because there are alternative meanings. Again, it's an aubergine, it's a vegetable, but the ulterior meaning is very different, and obviously you have to understand the message to receive it. Now Mead is a symbolic interactionist thinker in this sort of context. Now he's a very old thinker, it's sort of the late 1800s, early 1900s, he's coming up with these ideas, but ultimately what Mead observed was animals respond to an event using what he saw as a prefixed instinct. So basically they mirrored a response. And what he argued is that while humans respond to the world, they have attached meanings to events and they react based on how they interpret the event occurring. So his example was dogs bark. A dog barks, another dog will bark in response. It's mirroring the response. Humans are acting in a similar way, that we see an event happen and we react and respond on the basis of the event. So it is that kind of, I suppose it's not necessarily just copying the reaction, but we are choosing an appropriate response based on the event. So I guess the idea, if we were to try and apply it to humans, if someone's aggressive, our response in a similar way might be to be aggressive back, to mirror the response. But depending on the situation, the definition, the understanding, we might respond differently in the context. You know, someone might be play fighting, so we respond in a different way. Now, according to Mead, we take roles of the other. And so what Mead argued was that we try to understand the meanings, we try to imitate play, do role play, and we will imitate key figures. So it might be parents, it could be teachers, it might be police officers. Basically, we try to learn our role, the role of others, and we try to see ourselves through the eyes of other people in wider society. And all this functions in order to help us understand the world around us. Now Bloomer took this a little bit further and he identified three key things. He argues that our actions are based on the meanings we give to a situation. The meanings arise from interactions and they're not fixed from the outset of that interaction. They're negotiable, they're changeable, and obviously they are quite unique. And the meanings we give to situations are the result of the interpretive procedure we use, especially when taking the role of others. So ultimately what he's saying here is that all our actions, reactions, and the way we interact with people are based on the meanings we've attached to a situation, to the event, and to the people we're interacting with. The meanings we have, so our understanding of what an event's going to be like, will be based on previous experience or sort of notions we have of a meeting. And actually it doesn't mean that it's got to stay that way. So we might go into an event quite nervous because previously we've had negative experiences, but if it then becomes a positive experience, we can change our meaning and change our notion of what it is. And then what will happen is, as a result of the interaction, we will potentially change our understanding, we will interpret different ways to behave in future, and we'll also try to maybe look at it from other perspectives. So ultimately what Bowen was arguing is that although our interactions are partly predictable based on our meanings and our behaviours, a lot of it can change based on the event itself, the interactions, how people react. And obviously we're going to be updating our responses as we perform a role. Now, one thing about symbolic interactionism is it's a culturally relative approach. Now, one of the things is that when we send a message, both the sender and the receiver needs to understand the message. If one part of the sender or receiver doesn't understand the meaning of the symbolic gesture, then the message is kind of lost. And obviously, like that's the same with gestures and any kind of action. Now, let's move on to labelling theory. Now, a key argument in terms of these attachments of meaning is symbolic interactions. If we look at these images that I'm going to place on the screen. Now, you may look at these images, so 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I want you to make a prediction, a judgment, or maybe just come up with a word or something you associate with each group. Now, what you've just done, if you come up with a meaning, is a label. Now, you may look at the images and you might attach a meaning. So, number 1, we'd go with homeless. We might even think, it could be drug user. You might be dirty. We might attach lots of different meanings to that. But then if you think about the wider context, he might be a protester. He could be waiting in line for gig tickets or some kind of event. He could be a charity worker, collecting donations and sleeping rough for the day to gain the experience, but also to raise money. So again, we make a snap judgment. Same with number 2, we might think of Asbo's, Chavs, Yobs. He's got his McFlurry there, so they're probably hanging around a McDonald's car park with their hoods up. We might feel intimidated, but we don't know the wider context is that it's cold. They're outside because they've given up their table to an elderly couple because it was pretty busy, so that's why they're sitting outside. Number 3, you might assume that she's a prostitute, but she could be a girl just giving directions to someone. She could be paying a taxi driver. She could be saying bye to her dad after he's dropped her off at youth club. We don't know the context. Same with number 4, they could be a charity 5-a-side football team waiting for their minibus to pick them up to take them to their charity event to raise money for underprivileged kids. We don't know the context, but the ultimate idea of labelling is we attach a meaning. Now, once we've attached a meaning, we're going to treat these people differently. They may interpret the way we're treating them, they internalize it, and they behave differently. And Becker brings this up in a number of ways. Now, particularly Becker's work does apply a lot to crime and deviance. It also applies to education. So you would have seen Becker on labelling theory a couple of times by this point. Now, his work comes under symbolic interactionism because it is linked with the idea of attaching a meaning, an understanding, and a response to that meaning. And when he looked at crime and deviance, the quote that he kind of puts forward, and it's an interesting one, is the idea that interpreting deviance is not a set of characteristics of individuals or groups, but as the process of interaction between deviants and non-deviants. Again, there is a wider quote that's the idea that there is no inherently deviant acts, just acts we label as deviant. And that's kind of the argument he's making, is that there's no such thing as a bad person, a criminal person, a deviant person. It is the interactions between individuals where one of them will assign the role of you're a deviant, I'm not a deviant, and then that creates deviance in society. So just looking for this flow diagram. So an individual might commit a deviant act, which depending on the situation, it could go unnoticed, and nothing happens, or it's observed. Now, if it's observed, the individual becomes labelled. They are labelled by society. They get treated differently by friends, by family, because of the label that's been attached to them. A master status will develop. So that replaces any former identity they had. The label they're given becomes their main source of identity. Now, they may accept that label. They start to associate with other deviants, potentially other deviants with a similar label. This will lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy. They internalize what they are, what they've done, and that will lead to secondary acts of deviance. Now, from committing these acts of deviance, they are then relabeled. The label is then sort of doubled up. And as this cycle repeats and goes round and round and round over and over again, the label is reinforced and it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger as a source of identity for the individual. So imagine if we kind of put this in my context. Say I get caught. I finish work here on a Friday, I have a couple of drinks, I jump in the car and I drive home. I do that. I'm not saying I do it, I don't do it. But if I did that every week, you know, nothing happens, I just keep going. And then one Friday I get stopped, breathalyzed, and I'm done for drink driving. Now that label begins to attach. So I'm labeled as a drink driver. I'm a criminal. I've been punished. Now, when I come back to work, I might be treated differently by friends, by family, by colleagues. Students find out, and therefore I get treated differently. I may end up losing my job because of the negative impact and the label that's happened. Now, what happens is because of all that, my master status as a dad, as a teacher, as a friend, as a husband, all of that gets replaced. And the master status of a drink driver, an alcoholic, replaces that status. I then accept that I'm a drinker, I'm an alcoholic, and I might hang out with other deviants, other alcoholics in the park or outside the, I don't know, the offie, you know, I'm drinking my special brew. As a result of that, I then internalize, I accept that that's who I am, and the self-fulfilling prophecy takes place. I become the label. As a result of my drinking and my spiral down, I then start committing further acts of deviance, and I get charged with other crimes like shoplifting or vandalism or drunken disorderly. And what happens is the cycle just keeps going round and round, and the labels get added further and further, and they become stronger and stronger, replacing any sense of identity. So again, that's all hypothetical. I'm not saying I'm drinking or that's going to happen, but again, as we said at the beginning, you know, this initial point of me committing an act of deviance right here, oh, it's not very good highlighting there, you know, this initial act of deviance, if it goes unnoticed, as I mentioned, and there's no identification of it, then nothing happens. This whole flow diagram becomes moot. It's when that initial act of deviance gets spotted, that's when the change occurs. So in a slightly more conventional context, we looked at it in education. We know the teacher has an image of student based on dress, demeanour, postcode. That creates an expectation of their performance, whether they're going to succeed or underperform. They treat the pupil differently. They communicate that in terms of the praise or punishment. Pupil will internalise it. Their behaviour changes. It confirms the teacher's expectation. The teacher has had this idea that, you know, he predicted that student will underachieve at the beginning of the year. They've underachieved. It's all confirmed, and they continue to repeat the cycle with a new cohort of students every year. Now, labelling theorists have three key concepts. Now, again, we haven't necessarily looked at these concepts in much depth previously. We kind of gloss over them and kind of chuck them into that flow diagram. But these are three specific concepts and processes that happen during the labelling process. So we have deviant situation, defining the situation, the looking glass self, and the career. So the first of these is defining the situation. Now, Thomas argues that if people believe a situation to be true, it will have true consequences. So this is almost the very beginning of the labelling process, where a teacher, a moral entrepreneur, someone with power, labels another. They attach a meaning. They have a definition or an understanding of an event. Now, that's followed on with the looking glass self. Now, the looking glass self was Corley's initial argument. And again, it's the idea that we internalize the expectations, the treatment, the viewpoint of how others see us and treat us. And this is effectively what we always generally refer to as the self-fulfilling prophecy. We internalize the viewpoint. We see ourselves from the viewpoint of others. And this then leads to the deviant career, or the career. So this is where the secondary deviance, the deviant career that Lemur discusses in depth comes up. And again, once an individual has been labelled, they're treated differently, they develop the career which then starts that process off again. It reinforces a label and will lead to the master status being adopted. So again, some key concepts there, but they are pretty much ones we've already looked at. We've already gone through the process of labeling several times. This is just a few specific concepts for labeling that we've never really addressed prior to this section. Now, just one example. This is a really good study, and I will drop the links to these video clips in the description below. But again, it's this quote by Rosenhan, who says that at its heart, the question of whether the sane can be distinguished from the insane is it's a simple matter. Do salient characteristics that lead to diagnosis reside in the patient themselves or in the environments and contexts in which observers find them? Now, this is a really good example of labeling. So this researcher got people to present themselves to doctors or mental institutions claiming symptoms of an illness, a mental illness that he had created. So it would be stuff like hearing specific voices. They're presenting, they weren't looking after their personal hygiene and weren't brushing their teeth. And he wanted to see how many of them would be labelled as mentally unwell and potentially sectioned. And the idea being that this would be a short test, see whether they get sectioned, and then basically they would say, oh, no, I made it up, I'm sane, and now to be released. And he told the people that they might be kept for 1 or 2 days in an institute and then released. But that obviously didn't quite work out as he planned, because what happened was that a lot of the people, once they were labelled, they were institutionalised, and then any action, anything they did in these institutions just reinforced the label that they were insane. So saying I'm not insane, I made it up, just became another symptom of their insanity. And some of these people ended up being kept in institutions for far longer, months at a time even, than had originally been suggested. So a really good study, again, worth watching the video, just to put this context of labelling into a kind of a real practical situation. Now, Goffmans' model and the dramaturgical analogy. Now, again, there's another link here. I'm just going to drop this in the description. One worth watching. But Goffman's dramaturgical model is the idea that if you think like all the world's a stage, life is a performance, and he kind of takes that model into this process. So Goffman looks at the day-to-day activities we engage in, the commenting on interactions, engaging in using the drama metaphor. He analyses how we perform and manage the characters we are, and he came up with 2 key concepts. So he talked about the presentation of the self, first of all. So we try to present a certain image of ourselves to our audience. Goffman says that we must control and adjust our image, observing the reaction of others. And we try to create a convincing performance. And if you think in my role as a teacher, when I enter the classroom, I try to create the image of a teacher. So I will do this in terms of I have to wear a shirt and a tie and smart clothing. I wear my staff ID badge. I'll bring my props, which will be my board pen, my eraser, my laptop, my books. I will obviously perform and present information to you. I've obviously rehearsed that information. The lesson is planned. The materials have been prepared in advance. So I know what I'm going to do. I have rough timings. I have rough planning. So again, I've rehearsed my performance. And I will effectively perform a lesson to the students I teach. Now, once I perform that role, and I'm trying to convince that's my role, and I'm trying to convince the audience, the students, that I am a teacher, I am a teacher, but I'm trying to convince them that my performance is genuine, I will go backstage and engage in pressure management. So I'll go to the backstage. The front stage is the classroom, the backstage will be the staff room. And I will sit and I will reflect and I'll think about, what did I do well? What elements of my performance were good and potentially genuine? Which elements of my performance need to be developed and improved? What should I get some extra props? Which props didn't work? And ultimately, this is the impression management, thinking about what I've done and how to make my performance better. So this is as I said, the front stage and the backstage. You're performing on the front stage, which is your classroom. The backstage, you are hiding your performance, or you're maybe perfecting it, reflecting on it. You're probably your sort of true self in the backstage. The front stage, you're acting. if you have a part-time job, think about how you might perform when you're on the shop floor or sort of in the customer-facing role. So if you work at a restaurant, you know, when you're dealing with the public, the way you present yourself will be very different to when you're in the staff room, when you're backstage, when you're in the kitchen, where you're away from the members of the public, and the way you perform, where you behave, will be very different. Another video, again, I will drop in the link. It's a really good argument looking at the realities of social media versus the reality of life. And just as an example of this, I can show you two examples of my own social media output and the reality. So some of my social media output here from my Instagram, because I'm that cool, would be stuff like these. So as you see, images of my planner, which is all chaotic, you know, the word of the week program that or activity I did for a number of weeks, which again, I don't really do anymore, but for a number of weeks, this was kind of words of the week, and every week I'd go and wipe off these chalk wall words, I'd write new ones up on the window. The paper plate dinner party for Sociology, which hopefully we'll get to do once Corona's over. You know, planning, resources, you know, this is all the stuff that, you know, my front stage. And again, I don't use hashtags, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not that sad to shove a top teacher or aim for the A hashtag onto my post, but these will be the kind of images you might see. In the reality, this is all front stage. The reality, the backstage, is this. This is my desk. And again, the image that I present is this on top of teacher, hard-working, motivated, you know, which I am, but again, that's the image I present. The reality is this is my desk, the chaotic mess that is my desk, with piles of marking and just paperwork and planning that's like rewritten and drafted over and over and over again. This is the reality of my work life. Sitting at this desk in chaos, staring at the screen, making the PowerPoint you can see that we're watching right now. So this is the reality, and this is the backstage that I hide, whereas the front stage is the Instagram post, what I put out to the world. Now we're going to move to ethnomethodology. Now ethnomethodology is a slightly different approach, and it's the idea that an illusion shared by everyone becomes the reality. So ethnomethodology is a slightly different argument with symbolic interaction. We still do symbols and meaning, but it's presented in a different way. Now, the first of these is I want to put forward the balloon analogy. And this is my own analogy, so something I've created. Now, the balloon analogy, in terms of this ethnomethodology, is if you imagine, I say a little image, we have social order. Social order is maintained like a set of balloons. We're holding a big set of balloons, and that's social order. Now, the balloons don't have a big impact on our lives. They're there, they're above us, they're pulled along where we go, but we don't really think about them. They're not really doing much, having much of an impact, but they are fragile. And the only reason we realize that social order has been disturbed or disrupted is when one of those balloons pops. And we quickly act to replace the balloon that's popped to restore social order. And the idea being is a metaphor for society, and this ethnomethodology is that, you know, social order is like the set of balloons floating above us. They're there, they don't really do much, and we all, you know, we acknowledge they're there or believe they're there, but it's only when something happens that disrupts it that we begin to question is it there, and then we have to act to restore it. So this is the work of Garfinkel, who sort of came up with a set of approaches to deliberately disrupt social order to highlight how fragile and how it's not as strict and enforceable and rigid as we're led to believe. And the idea being that if all those balloons popped, if all social order is disrupted, we're going to lead to social chaos. So this is the work of Garfinkel, and this is this disrupting social order to highlight how fragile it is. And he did it by in terms of swearing in public or not following norms and conventions in public. But this is balloon analogy is my kind of way of trying to understand it and explain it. And then we have phenomenology. Again, another different piece here. So a sane person to an insane society must appear sane. So if we think about phenomenology and Christmas, so when you think about a typical Christmas day, you celebrate Christmas, you have celebrations, you have traditions, and that's how we understand Christmas. That's our understanding of Christmas and what it means to us. Now, Christmas, if you think about how other cultures celebrate, even how other families with those sitting around you in your area will all celebrate Christmas differently. They will have their different customs, traditions, different activities, different ways of celebrating. Now, we might look at other cultures, other families, even our friends' version of Christmas, and we might find them weird. But that's because it's different to how we understand Christmas. So our understanding of it is very narrow, and it differs from other people. So the best example I think of is the way that my family celebrate Christmas is very different to how my wife's family celebrate Christmas. And our experiences of Christmas growing up were very different. So the idea being that when I would go and spend Christmas with her family, I know I found it very odd, very weird. It was a very different type of Christmas. It didn't feel like Christmas to me. Vice versa, when she would come spend Christmas with my family, normal for me, but it was uncomfortable for her. And again, it's the idea being that we have our own understanding of Christmas, and being placed in a different situation makes it feel odd. And then lastly, in your pack, there are some evaluations of social action theory for you to take a look at. So quite a short overview really of social action theory. Hopefully this has explained some points for you, but as I said, use your pack alongside this, go back through the materials, reread it, and check your understanding of those key thinkers. And last but not least, on the last slide here are just some extra viewing to help explain social action approaches. So as I said before, these links will be dropped into the description. And there we have it. Thanks for watching. And again, if it's helpful, leave a like or a comment or anything just to help me develop these further. Thanks for watching.